Good morning and welcome to Crack the Mic podcast with Agent of Change Corey Davis. And this week's segment is entitled Black Mass Incarceration Part 2. Black mass incarceration is never seen as a byproduct of systemic racism. But I'd like to argue to the contrary. In fact, for example, racism has played a major role in this very issue. For example, dating back as early as during post-slavery, where we saw it being manifested in convict leasing, as we know it today. Now, to be clear, convict leasing can best be described as a system where state governments lease out prisoners, mostly African American men, after the Civil War to private companies to work for labor, essentially allowing companies to use forced labor for convicts under harsh conditions, often considered a form of slavery by another name due to the exploitative nature and disproportionate targeting of black people. The practice was legal because the 13th Amendment permits involuntary servitude as a punishment for this crime. And to help me further this discussion, I have a very interesting panel. Back to the panel this week, my sagacious panel that includes Dr. David Bullock, a gifted professor, therapist, preacher, and a social commentator who has appeared on MSNBC's The Rachel Maddow Show, The Ed Show, and is a commentator to syndicated press like The New York Times, Washington Post, and Russia Today. Last but certainly not least, I have Reverend Andre Green, lay minister for the Mount Hermon AME Church here in Miami Gardens, Florida, and he's also board member for PAC, a social justice organization that's been fighting for justice for over 30 years in Miami-Dade County. Good morning.
Good morning.
All right, so let's just get back into the discussion. And I want you, if you can share your sentiment, Reverend Green, on the question, do you feel that legislative policies like stop and frisk encourage law enforcement agencies to be a part of the problem versus being a part of the solution when it comes to Black mass incarceration? Honestly.
Well, I would say you can say yes and no, because what they're trying to do and what stop and frisk is supposed to do in a lot of communities of color, there's a lot of crime and stuff, and people want that out, or different things that are going on. I think that a lot of these laws are supposed to be written with intentions to lower crime, but I think the application of the laws kind of infringes on certain groups of people, that they can utilize them to weaponize them to kind of meet their purpose of a way of certain group of people want to think and control certain mass of people. They use these kind of tactics because once someone is depressed or they have a lot of pressure on them, they're not able to critically think, and you keep coming with all this pressure. And from a lot of this has to do with financial things, legacy wealth that was stolen and taken away, just a lot of mental issues within communities of color, along with some of these policies antagonize or intimidate these people to react a certain way, that then they want to classify them as being uncontrollable. That's why we need these programs in place. And they constantly harass them to use it of a way of weeding out people so they're not able to vote. All this stems from, setting up, the way that the voting came in, far as, back where slaves weren't counted as a whole person. In the South, that's where the Electoral College came into place and all these different things, which no longer should be in existence because we are complete citizens now. We're not 5/8 of a person and those type of things. So I think that a lot of legislation is based on some of those systemic things from the past that you were elaborating on earlier. You know, going back to biblical times or people in Europe, but in the Bible, mostly in Revelation, from Genesis to Revelations, I hear that Jesus had curly hair, his skin tone was brown, his arms were brown, his legs was brown. And if you got brown arms and brown legs, as it says throughout the Bible, it depicting how he looked, I think that's a person of color.
Absolutely, absolutely. But you did not ask the question, and I just want to, just for the listeners, do you agree that stop and frisk was a bad policy? Yes or no?
Yes, yes. I think it was a bad policy, but I understand the justification of what they were trying to do because of the level of crime in certain zip codes and trying to, do something to stir it up. But I think that the way that it was interpreted by a certain group of people because of their biases or however they were trained, they're in the law enforcement and it wasn't done properly. I'm sure there has been some stop and frisk situations that revealed some great results. But on the whole, I think it's a very bad thing, and I think it's a very negative thing on a community because it's just like the immigration. The immigration, they're going and looking at people of color. But for the last time I saw, I thought they were European immigrants and people from the Scandinavian countries that are in here illegal too. So I don't understand why everybody's looking at Haitians and South Americans. And I think there's Europeans, that are criminals that committed a lot of crimes in the eastern part of Europe and stuff that are in this country right now.
Right, right, right. And suffice it to say, we are definitely deporting every illegal immigrant. And it doesn't matter to the administration. Mr. Holman has made it very clear that anyone, black, white, purple, blue, that's in this country illegal will not stand a chance. So I respectfully disagree with you because I think that everyone who's in that net will be caught and would be deported. That's per
Corey, today is February 1st. Let's revisit this in May and let's see what the statistics say about the performative made for TV raids that they're doing. And let's see if we can see some Eastern Europeans and stuff that they're raiding and stuff like that. And having Dr. Phil go talk to them.
Well, I digress. I digress. All right, so let's just change the tides for a moment, if we may. Now, in you guys' view, what can legislators do to tackle this issue as it relates to Black mass incarceration from a legal standpoint, or a legislative, I should say, standpoint? What can be done, in you guys' view, legislatively to remedy this situation? You can go ahead, Dr. Balak.
Well, I really don't know. I want to add an answer to the question. So you're talking legislatively. I think what we can do is we can focus on changing the culture, right? Both the culture in our community, in the Black community, in terms of how we behave. People think that and maybe there is right now a correlation between low economics and low behavior standards. But people kind of assume that, but that really hadn't always been the case, right? Right. It wasn't the case that because people were poor, they were bad people, or because people were poor, they had bad character, right? So I think there's more to that story, right? But so my point is, I think we really need to think deeply about the kind of behaviors and the values in our culture, right? And we need to ask ourselves some deep self-reflective questions about who we are as a people and who we want to be, right? That that needs to happen. And then I think culturally, right, the people who get elected, right, to enforce the laws, as Reverend Green, I think, says so profoundly. The people who get elected or appointed, right, to enforce the laws, the people who decide to join police departments, right, the people who become chiefs of police, right, they also need a cultural change, right? So, I don't want to discount the force of your question, but a lot of times when we talk about politics and political realities, we talk about them in an abstract way as if people are not a part of how policies are implemented, right? And laws, as Reverend Green said, aren't interpreted, right? And budgets are written and executed, right? And so when it comes down to it, we really need to think about who we are as people. And I
Absolutely.
think that's when we'll really begin to see deep changes.
Absolutely. And there's an old saying, Dr. Bullock, art imitates life and life imitates art. But in our community, I definitely agree that the onus is on us. We have got to change the slow standards that you alluded to because the next generation, they're watching. And everything that we do, and we can see it all over social media, all over rap videos. So let's make masculinity great again. Because when you look at it, it's the stigma. It's a low level mentality where, and now I don't want to just say that everyone who has their pants sagging, they're a ragamuffin or a delinquent, but the fact of the matter is this: people will judge you by what they see. And if you want to go around lowballing yourself, let's raise the standards in our communities. I could not agree with you more, Dr. Bullock, because there's another saying, and interesting enough, there was two gentlemen. They talked about the seven spheres of influence, Dr. Bill Bright and Lauren Cunningham. And he used the title, or he used this concept. It's called the seven mountains. And they are business, government, media, arts and entertainment, education, family, and religion. And they thought of ways that they could infuse, I wouldn't say conservative principles, but I would just say godly principles. Because oftentimes, like you said, the kids are going to mimic what they see. And so we have this whole ideal of media being a sphere of influence. And who controls the media? Liberal orthodox. These liberal ideologists who comes up with this secular viewpoint where, like you said, like, hey, let's make masculinity great again. This effeminate type of energy, or either this hyper overly aggressive degenerate mentality, and typically it leads to our demise. But we definitely have to blame one of the spheres of influence, which is media, that Dr. Bill Bright and Lauren Cunningham talked about.
Well, I disagree.
I'm sorry, Dr. Green?
I said I disagree. I think that this masculinity thing has been taken to a level of non-reality. I don't think anyone, I think that it's respect, that I respect another person, and how, if they're an adult, I don't think children should be conflicted in that way, but I think that an adult who wants to decide to do something with their sexual orientation, and that's on them. I don't think they should be looked down on, treated any way. Do I personally feel a certain way about certain things? I may, but out of respect for another human being, I will give them that respect as long as it's not doing anything that is infringing on my freedoms and my ability. I will agree with that. I think a lot of things that is said by people, whether you want to say liberals or conservatives, which the other side is not a conservative party. I consider myself conservative in the way I think because there's certain things that I feel like I feel that we should do something at the border. I feel we shouldn't have people bum rushing the border. I think there's a port of entry and there's a process that people need to come in. What I don't agree with is the way it's being done to accomplish that, and the things that they're doing. I agree that European countries should pay their fair share. I don't agree in the way they go about doing it and saying what they must do. There's an etiquette to everything and a professionalism in the way you conduct yourself. And I think that we've gotten away from that. And I think that people are using, because you want to be proper or have some respect for someone, that because you can get up and cuss and call someone names, that makes you a man. No, it doesn't. It makes you a fool in my book, because that's the level of your vocabulary of expressing yourself, that you can't have a conversation with someone that you disagreement with and come up with a solution, not have it being fixed on your sides. The thing is solving a problem. And what we were talking about, and I guess what you want to talk to me about, is legislation and what can be done with legislation. And in my opinion, it's not what can be done. It's the people who are legislating, that let's say that I was a representative and I was passing a bill. Okay. Now I would say to myself, how would I feel about, the way this person is being, would I want to be treated the way this person is going to be treated if I put this into law? Would I want to be a black person or would I want to be a white person? And if the person say, well, I don't know if I want to be black, then why are you doing that? If you know that that's not right, if you ask a group of people, well, if they pass this law, would you want to be treated the way they treat black people on this law? Or would you want to be treated the way white people are treated on this law? Well, if you say, well, I want to be treated the way, then why are you making that law? That's a systemicness in the system right there. And people passing laws, when you ask them a question, would you want to be treated the way black people are treated? Or would you want to be treated the way white people are treated when they pass judgment on this? And if you don't say black, then why are you passing the law?
Absolutely. And since you went there and, honestly, I'm not one, Reverend Green, who's opposed to legally coming into the country. But I will say this here, with all honesty, if you look at Russia up under the leadership of Vladimir Putin, or China up under Qin, or even North Korea up under Kim Jong-un, neither of those countries would not tolerate the influx of immigrants entering into their country illegally. But we, the United States, up under the leadership of Joe Biden, has made that the norm. But even the Bible, you were reverend, the Bible says a city without walls is a weak city. So if we do not have some type of respect for the immigration policy of the country, hey, I don't have a problem with people coming in legally.
How was America
legally? You are afforded the opportunities as every other citizen here, because you're right. We are a country made up of migrants, but we come here legally. And when you don't do so, that is a problem. On many levels, our national security.
I think the first people that came here, were the Indians. The other people that came here were thrown out of prisons and stuff like that, and they went to a new frontier in this country. So China has been around for millions and thousands of years. Europe had their history. American history was the Indians. That was so. This should be India or whatever with that. But the Europeans came in here, so it became a melting pot. It wasn't like China. It wasn't like India. They still have their traditions and their customs of that country. America has a whole different identity after for about 200 years. It wasn't the same way it was 400 and 500 years ago as it was in China and India and all these other countries. America wasn't like that. They were Indians here. So I understand what you're saying. I agree that people should come into the ports of entry, but I don't agree about you saying people can't come here because these other countries are not letting them in and all that kind of stuff. That's called authoritarianism.
Oh,
That's
no,
not
no. What I
democracy.
said was countries aren't allowing them to come in illegally.
Well,
Now,
I
every country
agree
has
with
an
that.
immigration
Well,
policy, and if one obliges themselves to it, by all means, do so. But
yeah,
I digress.
I agree with. I agree with they should come in here legally. I just don't agree about the way they're going about doing it and the harshness and but they voted for 47 to be in the office for to do the things that he's doing. So all I can do is just pray for him and hope everything works out.
All right, we're going to go ahead and take a commercial. We'll be right back.
Have been together for a long time. Recently, I realized that I could use some help with basic everyday tasks, but Hal depends on me, and I'm not going to leave him. I don't have to. Yes, that was good news, wasn't it, Hal?
Immaculate Home Health Care can give you the help you need so you can stay safely and comfortably at home from a few hours a day to round the clock. Call today for your consultation. 561-372-9108. 561-372-9108. Online at Immaculate HHC.
We want to thank you for thank our sponsors. All right, so let's just change the tides for a moment, if we may. Now, Dr. Bullock, I'd like to ask you, in your view, what role does society play in mass incarceration? Because we talked a little bit about the spheres of influence that media, according to Dr. Bill Bright and Lauren Cunningham, and we know that media plays a big part in how society moves. It determines its modus of operandi. So what are your thoughts on the question, Dr. Bullock?
Well, there's so many different definitions of society, but let's pick one. So John Rawls has a concept called the basic structure of society. Society is like a closed system where institutions interact with within that system. And so there's like a basic structure, some fundamental institutions, which would be the way the legal, political, and economic structures distribute benefits and burdens. So if we think about that, right, what's the role of the way the legal system, the economic system, and the political system, right? Do those three fundamental systems contribute to to mass incarceration, right? And are they kind of systematically racist? I think the argument is yeah. And so what's the role? The role is the way the law and the way the economy and the way the legislators and the judges and the executors operate tends to produce bad outcomes for people of color when it comes to them losing their freedom. And I think part of what Reverend Green was saying about on the immigration front, right? We might say the same thing, right? The way the laws, the economy, and the political system kind of all work together to distribute benefits or burdens. They tend to distribute burdens to people of color when it comes to mass incarceration and immigration, right? And education, right? And I think this is kind of what America is still trying to come to terms with. Slavery is the original sin of this country. Racism and racial prejudice is one of the seeds of that sin. right? But America is fundamentally built on denial, right? As a collective psychological coping mechanisms. Americans don't look backwards. Like, Europe is the old country, right? Reverend Green was so perceptive, I think, in some of the things he said. Like, China has been around for a very, very long time. America really is a teenager, right, on the global stage, right? And so we are a teenager, but we've got old parts, right? And so we're kind of degenerating. And some people say we are seeing the end of the American empire, right? But however you see it, right, fundamentally, Americans don't think about how America came to be, right? Because if you start looking backwards, then you can understand, some of the things that we're talking about right now are fundamentally tied to our history and how we came to be. So I think how does like the fundamental institutions of our society affect mass incarceration, right? Well, I think they tend to distribute burdens to people of color, right? And that's why we call these societies kind of fundamentally structurally racist, right? And then the room splits in half. Some people think we're right about this, other people think we're wrong, right? And then the politricks, not the politics, the politricks start, right? Because now people develop labels and categories, and the data is different, and well, it depends on how you measure it and what are we talking about. But generally, the way the structure tends to produce negative outcomes for people that look like us says a lot about the structure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. You want to share your thoughts on that question, Reverend?
Sure. What role does society play to mass incarceration? I guess they're complicit. Society is complicit. Goes back to what I said before. If you ask everybody in this country, based on the legislative laws and the mass incarcerations and the way that the judicial system is treating people of color or a white person, what would you rather be based on the legislative system in this country? Would you rather be a person of color? Or would you rather not be a person of color based on the way the system's set up? Well, I think most people will say the latter. They will want to be the other instead of a person of color. And I think that, that's where we really have to start, man. It's the people who are legislating, the type of people that we have in office, their standards. It's just that society has become complicit. Everything has become performative, like we're in some type of reality show or some kind of soap opera, and everybody's so mesmerized and they're being grifted. Barnum Bailey said it best: "There's a sucker born every second." And I think there's a whole. I'm not going to go there, but the only time would tell, my brother. Right now, we're in the infant stage, but what is going on right now is my hand is here, and I'm saying, look over there, look over there, look over there. You understand? So we'll see in the next couple of months what it's like dating. When you're dating a woman, the first 3 months, kind of hold it together. And I always tell my daughters, after 3 months, you really know what that guy is about because they're not going to hold it together that long. So I haven't seen the people that are in power now in the last 20 years legislate anything. So let's see what happens. My prayers are for them. I love this country. It's provided me a lot of opportunities. And as Benjamin Franklin says, the republic is a very fragile thing if you can keep it.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with you more. But you know what? Because you alluded to the next 3 months, and I can tell you what that will be like. It will be like the golden age of America.
I hope so.
And I'll say this here respectfully because we know
it wasn't a golden age for us.
Listen,
after Reconstruction,
we know what our previous administration did to this country. However, we know what the current administration did to this country 45 undoubtedly is different from 47, but they were equally wonderful, quite frankly. And I will say this here. So if we're looking to see a foreshadow of what's to come, we can see prosperity. We can see a economy that is booming. In fact, just the other week, we saw the Dow go up about 500 points after he made an announcement.
Yeah,
That
so you
we
know,
would be doing certain things for our country.
I know it's your show, and I appreciate you having us on. And you know, it's always wonderful to let people expose themselves. I think we've got to get back to a sense of balance. And you know, Reverend Green said, as you were talking, well, when was it great for us? And it's like, well, who's the we? When somebody says we or us, who's the us? Who's the we, right? It's going to be great. Great for who, right? 3% of the people in this country own businesses. 3%, according to the census, right? I'm quoting someone who quoted that statistic. Dr. Wolf, he's an economist. 3%, which means 97% of the people in the United States of America are not owners, they are employed, they're employees, right? Another interesting fact about the United States of America, we used to be a manufacturing titan, you know, Motown was Motor Town, right? So you had the wheels and the record in the car, right? But Detroit is not Motor Town, right? It's like the rebirth city or something like that, right? So what does that say? That says we've shifted from manufacturing to service industry. Most of the jobs that people will have, right? If you are under 30, the odds are you will be working when you're 50 and it's some kind of service industry job, right? And so those jobs don't pay as much as manufacturing jobs, right? And they also say something about the way the world has changed, right? We're not getting stuff from America, okay, in terms of, you know, the steel, the wood, right? The goods, the services. This is why Trump is talking tariffs, talking so tough, right? It sounds like tough talk. It's not really tough talk. It's just going to ultimately hurt the people buying the stuff over here. But we don't understand anything about money, right? But the idea, if tariffs are a threat, then that lets you know globally, we're not making nothing, right? We're buying it from other countries. So then he's just going to raise the price on the consumer for the stuff that we buy. Look at the back of your TV. Right? Look at where your windshield wipers come from. Even if you buy an American-made car, so to speak, where the parts come from, right? Where the metal footer parts come from, right? Look at your couch, right? If you shop at IKEA, all these places, shopping online, Amazon, where's the stuff coming from, right? Longer story. So I'm just going to end it here by saying, when we idealize and fantasize and create lies about it being great, right? You gotta be in a sad psychological state to need a fantasy to replace your reality. The fact that people buy the fantasy that we ever were great and will become great again says a lot to me about the truth of their real life, right? And people are fantasizing.
They're projecting.
Project, right? Pick a moment in time. Great 1950? Not for my great grandfather. I mean, I'm saying, so pick a time.
Well,
Ain't no well.
Dr. Bullock,
Pick a
here's
time.
the issue. Because Karl Marx said it in the Communist Manifesto. He talked about how socialism, and if that is the text, and I believe it is, but he talks about how typically what happens when you place all these heavy taxes on the ruling class, typically what the ruling class does is leave. And that's what we've seen happen with this economy. Most of the companies are business owners. They find it cheaper to get labor in third world countries because we are taxing the crap out of them. And as a result, what happens, Dr.
I'm gonna say we should just not have this conversation, or we should have it as a separate segment, because there's so many assumptions being made here. First of all, the United States dollar is the global standard. right? So we're talking about countries moving to other locations, right? But the truth is that the United States dollar is the global standard, right? The central banks around the world hold most of their liquid cash assets in US dollars, no matter the country, right? It was 70%, now it's down to 40 cents, right? You got inflation, and then you got the devaluation of the dollar, which is why people are getting into digital cryptocurrency, right? Because digital cryptocurrency can give you returns that you never expected. Bitcoin went up from $60,000 to over $101,000, right? Roughly in the last 6 months. It's hovering around $102,000 right now, right?
And
So
it was
you have,
accredited
right,
to,
but well,
it was accredited to who?
Bitcoin went up 6 months ago. Joe Biden was president, so don't talk about Trump.
Well,
Right.
they knew that Trump, well, they knew that he was
No,
going
no,
to
no, no,
bid
no.
off. I digress.
Let me finish. My point is the United States of America is the economic standard, right? And so people want to kind of talk, they want to talk about, companies moving overseas or finding a cheaper workforce, blah, 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 blah. How taxes on the wealthy, right, are going to hurt the country. This conversation to me is lopsided, right? Look around. People are hurting. The country's already hurting. But I tell you who's not hurting, right? The cat with the $1 million toilet seat, right? The person with 10 homes, right? But you got people working 2 jobs, still can't make ends meet, and then we want to call them lazy because they're poor, right? So this is really what's going on. But this is a longer conversation.
Hey,
But
I'm waiting for the price of my eggs to go down, man.
All right.
Look,
I'm
So
waiting for the price. I'm
let's
waiting for
go
the
ahead
price
and
of
change the tides for
make
a
America
moment.
great again. You know what I mean? It's like great for who? Great when? What time? What does great mean? What are we talking about?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I
DE and
digress.
I was
If that's
trying
your
to
hope,
make
we can have a
America
whole
great.
nother discussion about that, and that'll take us to a bridge to nowhere. All right, but let me change the tides for a moment, if I may. Should community leaders join forces with government, other community leaders, businesses to help reduce the percentage for people of color as it relates to mass incarceration? I think it's a community effort. Would you agree?
Yes, I do agree that it is a community effort on joining forces with government, but there's a caveat to that. Um, I feel that the people that are in government, it just depends on what their self-interest is. I work with the social judges. I sit on the executive board of an organization, and we talk to elected officials, whether it's from gun violence, affordable housing, unfair arrest, gentrification in communities, and those type of things. It just depends on the legislative branch and what their self-interest is. And the self-interest is always tied to money and wealth, for themselves and for their family or political power. And as soon as we can get money, it's just like with the 47 with this Bitcoin, enriching yourself. There's certain laws that are in this country right now that are constitutional, that once you take an elective office, you have to diverse yourself from all those things so that you're not tempted and you can't be influenced by a foreign company or be bought. But we are so complicit that we allow something that's never happened before, someone to enrich themselves and then go after the former person for saying they enriched themselves, and they're projecting and doing the same thing, but on steroids. So it's almost like the pot calling the kettle black. And what I see that's happening now is that they're projecting the other side and trying to put some of the stuff that they were doing and saying they're exposing stuff that the other side is doing, which they were doing all the long time. Basically, what they're doing is they're telling on themselves, but they're projecting it on someone else and saying that's what they're doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So I want to ask you this last question, Dr. Bullock. In your view, and not only Dr. Bullock, but you too, Reverend Green, we can kind of chime in no particular order. What is the most important effect of Black mass incarceration in America today, in you gentlemen's view?
Well, I think there are a number of important effects, outcomes, right? I think of family separation, right? Parental separation. So children get separated from parents, right? Husbands get separated from wives. Wives get separated from husbands. So interruption in family relations. I think the breakdown of community happens, right? So when families are interrupted, community is interrupted. I also think there is a reintegration, right? A reentry problem, right? So, when people come back home, how do they get reintegrated, right? How do you stop recidivism, keep them from going back? What do you do with people who are stigmatized because they were in the system, right? So I think those are some important effects. I also think on another way to have a different kind of conversation. There is a glorification of the criminal, right? There's a glorification of the prison industrial graduation, right? And it's interesting, and I won't say too much because I haven't done the extensive research that I need to do, but just my experience with Black people and others is interesting because, the guy or girl who comes home from prison on some level receives an accolade. They're respected.
That's true. That's true.
We talk about them like they learned something, they know something, and indeed they did learn something. But but in some sense, the University of Adversity diploma is more value than the Morehouse College diploma.
Absolutely. I echo that.
It's interesting. Think about our heroes. Jay-Z, but I don't know if Jay-Z went to jail. He's so dope. But 50 Cent went to 50 Cent went to jail. Snoop Dogg had a whole album called Murder Was the Case That They Gave Me. He beat the murder rap, but he was headed that way, right? But he does have a lyric in the song that says, I spent 5 years in the county with nothing but convicts around me. Right? So, county jail, federal prison. You know how many people go to federal prison, come out, man, and then become entrepreneurs and become pillars of the community? And part of their resume says, I was in federal prison. And we go, cool. Brother must be it. And don't get me wrong, I got to be careful with this, right? Because I'm not saying, because Malcolm X is a part of the transformation narrative.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And so I'm not saying that you can't transform your life. And I'm not saying prison can't be a transformative moment. Stanley Tukey Williams, right, wrote the book. He got into prison. He's fighting for peace, right? And you have freedom fighters in prison. Eldridge Cleaver, was organizing in prison, right? Social justice. So I don't want to be misconstrued, but I think one of the interesting outcomes of mass incarceration is this particular kind of media glorification. It's like what you see with pimps and pimpology, right? Absolutely. You know what I'm saying? And walking the stroll, and like the 70s and movies like the Max. So now you got people selling game. It's amazing to me. Like you can watch YouTube and somebody's making thousands of dollars selling game, pimpology, right? How to deal with your woman. And it's like, man, this is amazing that people would think that this is like, laudable, right? This is praiseworthy. So I think there's an interesting kind of elevation of incarceration in our minds. So people don't necessarily want to be incarcerated, but they don't necessarily want to avoid it either.
The badge of honor.
It's like, yeah, I did my time. And I have had the experience, depending upon what I was wearing and what city I was in, of being asked,
powerful.
When did I do mine?
Absolutely.
And I had to say, I did my time in Morehouse. Right? not
Absolutely.
not upstate in Pennsylvania. It's like if you're a black man, you play ball or you've been to jail or both. And I think that's an
Absolutely.
interesting consequence of mass incarceration as well.
That's powerful, Dr. Bullock. All right, Reverend Green, you have the last word, sir.
Well, what is the most important effect of incarceration? I guess a stigma or a stereotype. As Dr. Bullock said, some people glorify it, some people don't. My experience is that there is certain people that do come out of that experience and elevate themselves, but there is a high recidivism of people who don't. I have personal experience of people that I know spent a lot of time, and I think it wasn't 24 hours that individual came back out. He went back and did the same thing, and the FBI was watching him still because there was a big situation involved in, and went right back in. So, and he was one of the sharpest brothers that I knew. Um, I think a lot of that has to do with a person's consciousness. Through adversity, we strive and we do better. I mean, all three of us are here because our ancestors survived Middle Passage. So that's how I look at the situation that's going on right now in this country. We as people of color, we've been through this. My mother, my grandparents, they survived through this. 1917, they had that bird flu or whatever it was. All of us, we're still here, and we're going to survive this. It's just like, I was meditating, Lord, and had a vision of, one of the warriors came in when they were going into the promised land, and he come back with a report, and he said, man, they're giants, they're big. I don't know if we can, do that. And he said, that's nothing but the arm of the flesh. And they fought among themselves. That's what's going to happen in this situation, is that they're going to fight among themselves. And because I've never seen them legislate in my last 20, 25 years, and this history, the same thing is going on now, has gone on in biblical sense. We've had Nebuchadnezzar's and all these kings and all these people who had all these ideas who want to take over, but there's only one power, and we as a people, we have to speak in one voice, and we have to fight for what is right and find solutions to problems. It's not about black or white. It's not about who's right or who's wrong. It's about of a standard of living that we all want. We all want to take care of our families. We all want good jobs. We all want good paying incomes. We all want good insurance. We all want to live into a safe community and not have people come in and do things that are not. Everybody wants that. And how we accomplish that, we have to come together and agree that, not that one person dictates and says that this is the way it's going to be because I know and I'm going to make it right. And you're the biggest crook. And I will end on that, my friend.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time for this week's segment, Black Mass Incarceration Part 2. I want to thank my sagacious panel that includes Dr. David Bullock, also Reverend Andre Green. But before I leave, I'd like to leave you with this here thought by Michelle Alexander. We could choose to be a nation that extends care, compassion, and concern to those who are locked up and locked out. Again, this is your agent of change, and I want to remind you to like and share this YouTube channel. Again, this is your agent of change signing off with Crack the Mic. Peace.
Recently, I realized that I could use some help with basic everyday tasks, but Hal depends on me, and I'm not going to leave him. I don't have to. Yes, that was good news, wasn't it, Hal?
Immaculate Home Health Care can give you the help you need so you can stay safely and comfortably at home from a few hours a day to round the clock. Call today for your consultation. 561-372-9108. 561-372-9108.